حضورنا الكريم، نرحب الآن بنائب رئيس مجلس الإدارة لشركة جنرال إلكتريك السيد جون رايس.
Ladies and gentlemen, Vice Chairman, General Electric, Mr. John Rice.
Good morning. I've been asked to talk about the energy equation for a few minutes before the next panel gets started. And I thought I'd start with a comment that I think many of you already understand, but just to reinforce what I'm going to say later. Like many of you, I travel all over the world. One of the things I hear just about every place I go, three words that inform the way we need to think about the energy equation. The three words are sustainable, inclusive growth. It's the aspiration, I think, that every country has for their population. And the pressure to deliver on this aspiration is more significant than ever. Now, how do you do that? You have to do a lot of things to achieve sustainable, inclusive growth, but you can't do much of it without electricity, without the flow of energy that creates basic power generation so that you can then fuel all the other good things that come from that: clean water, basic forms of health care, educational systems that fuel and feed the population. So this notion of sustainable, inclusive growth is really at the heart of what we need to think about when we think about the energy equation. I'm going to make four basic points before I turn it over to the panel. The first point is the world that we live in. At $30 a barrel, with low commodity prices all over the place, right? We live in a cost per unit world. We didn't really live in a cost per unit world at $100 a barrel. We do live in a cost per unit world at $30 a barrel. It's a world that's shifting from CapEx to OpEx. And what does that mean for companies like ours? We have to be smarter about financing, because the countries we do business with and the companies we do business with have to reserve their balance sheets for different things. So we now have to be part of the process that connects capital that's interested in investing in long-lived assets to the good infrastructure projects around the world that will be the home for these assets. We also have to develop the capabilities to monitor assets in life. We and our customers have to think more about life cycle costs than ever before. 20 years ago, it was a first cost world. The focus was on the price of the gas turbine or the jet engine or the wind turbine. Today, there's a much better understanding about life cycle costs and the value that together we can create and the way we can minimize those costs. And we have to think about going from asset monitoring, which many of us do, to asset diagnosing, to asset predicting, to asset correcting. And that's in fact the journey that we're on, and we're doing that in Qatar with RasGas. We're doing it in Pakistan with our energy customers there. We've moved from monitoring 20 years ago to diagnosing, to beginning to predict when there are incipient failures, now to working with customers to correct so that the dislocation that occurs if an asset needs to be repaired is as minimal as possible. Because we know that for our larger customers and their larger installations, one day of downtime costs millions. The second point I'd make is about the regulatory environment. Lots of discussions about regulatory work. I was in a panel at Davos last week, and we were discussing smarter regulations, right? Some people think that that's a contradiction in terms, but we live in a world where regulations are going to matter, regulators matter, and our job is to make sure that we're providing the information necessary to facilitate good, competent, market-facing regulations that are consistently applied so that investors will invest, right? At the heart of this is the notion that maybe countries and companies need to use their balance sheet for different things. They have to attract financing from third-party financial institutions. They need regulations which support this. Investors who are going to invest in long-lived assets want more clarity and a longer time frame in this regulatory environment. And these kind of regulations will be the ones that promote balanced growth and diversified economies and facilitate privatization. Without those regulations, we won't have it. The goal is to attract people who are willing to invest their capital and generate reasonable risk-adjusted returns. The third category I'd like to touch on is human capital. This is really where we and other companies have to form new partnerships. And in our case, that's a partnership here in the kingdom with our Saudi Aramco and Saudi Electric and KFU PM to develop next generation training. We have to be thinking about the new skills we're going to need in the 21st century in preparation for people who will be lifelong learners. In a faster, nonlinear world, which is the world that we live in, we've got to prepare people to adjust. And this is a world where curiosity may be just as important as IQ when you think of the caliber of the people that you want to hire and how you develop them. We all here talk about localization. One of the problems with localization is it's an arithmetic exercise. It's usually discussed in the context of a percent of a deal, right? If I'm gonna get an order for $100 million and 60% needs to be localized, I've got to spend $60 million locally. What we miss is the ecosystem that should go with that localization. When we make an announcement about an investment, people want to talk about dollars, how much is the plant going to cost, and how many people are going to work there. That's only a small part of the story. They should be asking us about training and development and capacity building. Because if we invest $100 million in a plant and we add 500 people, and we don't train and develop and improve capacity, 500 becomes 300 over the next 5 or 10 years. If we do that, 500 becomes 800 or 900 or 1,000. And nowhere I go in the world do people really get into capacity building when they talk about localization. For too many places, too many governments, it's a mathematical exercise. And it really needs to be so much more in that. So we've got to expand the discussion and think about the ecosystem, not just the number of jobs. How many engineers are we going to have in our Durand Techno Valley Center is important, but what's really important is how they're going to be plugged into a global innovation ecosystem. If they're not, then the number we have will probably not grow. If they are, then work will flow to wherever we can find good people and create good outcomes with the work that they do. The fourth category that I want to just touch on briefly is the digital category, because I'm convinced that the energy equation in the 21st century is going to have a big aspect to it that's a digital equation too. Big data, everybody talks about big data, we talk about the industrial internet, this convergence between industrial companies and digital companies, we're coming together. And it's either going to be a conversion or a collision. Understanding and creating value from data flows is a thread that works through everything I've talked about today. We have to figure it out, you have to figure it out, and countries have to make sure that the laws that they write and the regulations they write around data flows allow them to participate. And I think there's going to be a real challenge because we all want data security, we all want privacy, and that conflicts a little bit with this notion of big data, data flows that are going to go everywhere in the world. Our supply chain is global today. We may produce a jet engine in Cincinnati, Ohio, but 40% of what's in that engine comes from another country. If you're going to have a digital supply chain and a digital thread that goes throughout that supply chain, you've got to be able to move information around. We monitor 20,000 jet engines in service everywhere in the world, takeoffs and landings. We need to be able to use that data in every country to create more value for our airline customers. So we've got to really understand these cross-border data flows, and in this way, create an energy future that's efficient, productive, and sustainable, and goes hand in glove. It's the underpinning for what I talked about at the very beginning, this quest for sustainable, inclusive growth. And now I want to thank you for listening, and we're going to have the panel in just a minute.